Many years ago, I had a small pickup truck. It was kind of a junker. Mostly, I just used it for when I had some stuff to haul to the town dump. It wasn't pretty, but it mostly served my purposes. But this little truck had a problem. It would constantly overheat. Even in the cold Maine winter, I'd have to keep an eye on that temperature gauge to be aware of when the engine got too hot. And sometimes, when it showed that it was getting really hot, I'd have to just pull over, let it cool down, maybe add some coolant to the radiator once it was cooled down enough for me to remove the cap. It was an inconvenience sometimes, but I never felt like I was in danger with it. My guest today is Rachel, and she experienced something similar. Except in her case, she was on a bridge with no breakdown lane, and her 2 babies were with her. And her car did way more than just overheat. Real people in unreal situations.
The eerie silence when I walked in, and he's just staring at me.
I was like, hello, like, are you okay? And then I had to tell him it was me.
There was just blood everywhere.
They're shouting, they're screaming, they're being hit by bullets, they're hitting the ground.
And in that moment, I literally thought, this is how I die.
Everything changed then.
And I just thought to myself, this isn't happening.
Every single story deserves to be heard.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like? When this happened, you were driving to work. What kind of work do you do?
At the time, I was the director of a day activity program for adults with developmental disabilities. So it was a recreational program. We did all sorts of things like drum circles and art projects, and I did fitness with them. And it was just a place where people with disabilities could go and hang out for the day and give their caregivers respite. And actually, the day that this happened, I was driving to the Christmas party. So it was one of the biggest days of the year for my clients.
Did that mean that there was more traffic on the road or less, or do you remember?
Well, it was in the morning on the way to school, school and work, and that kind of busy morning
Rush
commute.
hour.
So, yep, it was busy. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that morning. What time was this when you were driving?
Roughly 8:00 in the morning. Yeah.
How far did you have to go to get to work?
At the time, I was living in a city called Everett, one of the biggest cities in Washington. It's the home of Boeing. And also we have the Navy there as well. So just a lot of traffic, a lot of people, and a lot going on in the mornings. I had to drive my children to daycare first. So that was where I was on my way to. And that was probably about a 20-minute drive from my home.
All right. And you mentioned your kids. Who was in the car with you?
So at the time my daughter was probably around 3 years old. And then I had a little baby boy, 9 months old.
Okay, so your 2 kids, and you've already sent me this information. Your 3-year-old daughter was Talia, and 9-month-old son is Weston.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So and I assume they were both in car seats.
Yes. Yeah. And Weston was just a little guy at the time. So he was in one of those rear facing car seats that has a handle that you scoop under the arm to carry it, and you disconnect it from the base of it.
Okay. It's like a quick attach, deattach.
Right.
Quick attach. Is deattach a word?
I'm not sure. But yeah, you can deattach it.
Okay.
We'll make it a word. And it goes into like a stroller,
right.
That kind of click.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. When it started, were you already on the phone with your husband?
Not when it started. I was just kind of had left the house in a hurry. And, as it always is when you have young children, it's kind of just assembly line, make sure everyone has their lunch and their hats and their shoes. And, we were kind of rushing out. Also, I just had a lot on my mind because I was supposed to be preparing for this big party, which, I was performing like Christmas music that morning, and I had Santa arriving. So I was coordinating, with Santa arriving and getting dressed, and all of my clients were bringing family. So it was a very big day at work. So I was really my head was in a lot of places at the time.
You're going
out.
A lot of different directions, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the first indication that something was wrong?
I was driving through town and still in Everett, hadn't gone on the trestle, which is the bridge that connects over it's like an estuary or like an inlet that leads to Lake Stevens, where my kids needed to go to daycare. So I hadn't even left town yet, and I had to call my husband for something.
And this is your husband, Ruben?
My husband, Ruben. And I was telling him, maybe we need to pick up milk, or, it was something very just rushed and kind of a thought that I had in the back of my head. And sometime today you need to pick this up or something. And as we were talking, I was like, it smells so bad. And it did really smell like plastic melting. But sometimes in Everett in the mornings, it does have like a strong, like smoky or melty smell, because there's a lot of bakeries, and sometimes they will burn their bread or burn cookies or something in the morning. And then also we do have whatever's going on the Navy base, and sometimes, I don't know what is happening there, but sometimes there can be like strong smells or stuff going on there too. So I just was like not thinking it was connected to my vehicle at all. Up to this point, my car actually had been running really well for us. I, told him it really smells bad, and that was it. I didn't even think something might have been wrong.
And he wouldn't have thought anything's wrong either, right?
No.
It was just a funny smell. Yeah.
Right.
But it actually smelled like it was like burning?
I would say like a plastic melt smell.
Okay.
So then I got off the phone and I continued to drive. And this is, when you get onto the trestle, it's a busy, I think it's 3 lanes, because 1 lane is only open in the early morning and evening commute, just opens so that more cars can go on the road. So at the time it was very busy. I think all 3 lanes full going one way. And this is also a lot of big trucks, and it's a busy, fast kind of road. So there's no real shoulder at all on this road. And it's about 2.5 miles each way.
Are you ever nervous going over this bridge? I mean, it is a bridge, right? It's called a trestle, but it's a bridge.
Right. I think maybe it's just what the locals call it, but we call it the trestle. Essentially connects 2 highways. And when I was, a teenager, like learning to drive, that was definitely the road that we avoided until I was really ready to merge, because it is busy. So a little bit scarier. Yeah. Going over the trestle, and that was when I started to see a little bit of smoke in my view in front. And then the temperature gauge went from cold to hot. It just went from cold to hot, like so quickly, like almost like it snapped all the way up, not even gradual, just snapped all the way up to hot. And I definitely noticed that. And I was like, something is wrong. There was no shaking. The vehicle wasn't shaking. It wasn't difficult to drive. It wasn't making noise. It was just smoking. And so I'm just driving along, and I thought, well, at this point I could still see some in front of me. And I thought, I am not going to pull over with my babies on the side of this road. I am going to make it all the way across and then pull over in a safer place. And
was there any place to even pull over anyway?
Not really. There's like this skinny shoulder. And what I have heard in the past, and I didn't receive, any tickets or anything like that, but I have heard that you can get a ticket on this road for pulling off. And so I also had that in my mind, like, I don't even think I'm allowed to stop here. So if you did stop, would you be actually blocking traffic in one of the lanes? Well, pretty much. I would definitely feel like I was in the road, but it's like the skinniest shoulder. It's definitely not safe. No, not at all. I was going a little bit faster than I would normally, trying to get across before I couldn't see anything. And in front of, on my dashboard, where it usually would say PRND, like park, reverse, neutral, drive, that just said stop. Like directly across it, it just said stop, which I didn't know cars did that, and I have never seen that before. But that to me was like, okay, something is wrong. Later on, I after the incident, when I had spoken to my dad, who is a mechanic, I told him everything that happened. And he told me that when the gauge flipped like that to hot, that indicates that there was a fire under the hood, but we couldn't see the flames at that point. So I'm driving along, and the smoke is getting higher and higher. And pretty soon I can't see anything in front of me at all. So I had to stop and just pulled off, as far as I could, almost touching the edge, just on the end there. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to call my assistant at work. She's going to have to start taking over for me. I'm going to obviously be late. I'm going to have to call a tow truck. But the first person that I called actually was my husband, Ruben, again. And I told him, hey, there's smoke coming from the car. I don't know what's going on, but I'm just pulled off here on the side of the trestle. And he's not really a mechanically minded kind of guy. He's not a car guy. He didn't have a dad growing up. He just didn't, learn anything about cars. And so he was like, well, just try and stay safe. And he was very far away as well. He was about probably 45 minutes away from me at that time.
I wanted to hear from Ruben what his thoughts were for that phone call. And so let's listen to that now.
When I got that first phone call from Rach, she was clearly panicked and stressed. It took me a second to decipher what she was trying to tell me. I was at my job. It was a new job I recently gotten. It was really important for our family, and it was about 50 miles away from where this event happened, so I wasn't close. And she was telling me that the car's temperature gauge shot up and it was running hot, and she had to pull over on the trestle. Immediately, I knew that was a bad situation to be in. I tried to remain calm and be a voice of guidance and help. Now, for context, I'm not a cars guy. I'm not mechanical at all. But I had a vehicle when I was younger that was not very reliable or good, that ran hot as well. And when that happened, we would pour a little water on the radiator and just get the car somewhere safe. So I think that was my initial thought of what she could maybe do. But again, not a cars guy. And thinking about that now, that would probably have been a disastrous thing to do.
So there really wasn't much he could do.
I think he felt helpless at the time, and he did give me the advice to pop the hood, which I didn't end up doing just because I was nervous to get out of the vehicle on such a busy road. Later on, speaking with my father, he told me that would have been a very bad idea because I was up high in the morning with the wind and everything, and that could have caused an actual explosion to get air to the engine. So thankfully, I did not do that, but I did get off the phone with Ruben, and then I called AAA. And my dad has always, my entire life, told me that I have to have AAA. It's been ingrained in my mind, but at that time, my membership, had expired. And so I called to try to get a tow truck. I explained my situation. I said, I have 2 babies here in the car, and I'm on the side of a very busy road with lots of trucks. My car is smoking, and I definitely need a tow truck. And they told me that they could do that, but that I needed to sign up for a membership. So here I am, still pretty, my heart is already kind of racing, and she's asking for my credit card details, and I'm giving her that slowly so that she can hear me. And then she's asking, well, do you want to be in the gold or the platinum class? And I just cut her off, and I just said, is it okay if we send the tow truck here first and get my children to a safe place, and then I pay afterwards? And no, apparently that's not how it works. I had to, go through this whole process.
Wow. That sounds incredibly frustrating.
I know. So I've learned my lesson there, but yeah, so I'm slowly speaking with her so she can hear me. And,
so you're actually buying a membership now.
I'm buying a membership with my car, like smoking into the air with my children in the backseat, and they're restless. They're little babies. So they're just starting to kind of get restless anyway and not understanding what's happening. And as I was on the phone with her, giving her my details, that's when I saw a flame just right in front of my eyes coming up from under the hood up my windshield.
Oh, so not out from like in the front of the car, but it was right where the windshield is.
I saw it right in front of my face. Yeah. I can still see it vividly, actually. As soon as I saw that, I screamed, "My car's on fire!" And I put my phone into my pocket, and I could hear her, the AAA agent, yelling, "Call 911, call 911." And I just obviously felt I had seen action movies. I wasn't sure how much time I had if my car is on fire to when it explodes. That's really what I was thinking in my mind. This car is about to explode. I have to get my children, the blankety blank, out of this car. So I just reached in and, you kind of think as a parent, it's of course your worst fear to have to rescue your children. Unbelievably, my husband, just like a couple weeks before the incident, had actually had a dream of driving over the trestle. He told me, I had a dream of I was driving over the trestle and the car, I had both kids in the back seat and the car went off the edge into the water and I had to rescue one of them. And he said, wouldn't that just be such an impossible choice? Which child would you save? And I was like, that's impossible. You can't choose one. But it is, I don't know, for some reason, just the worst fear of a mother, of a parent. And now I know what you do. You just reach for the child that is closest to you and it was like I was moving my legs and I was just moving as fast as I could without really thinking, just doing.
All instinct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so which one was closest?
My son was the closest because when I opened up my door, his door was right behind my door. I would have had to walk around to get my daughter.
So when you got out, were you sort of stepping into right where traffic was?
Yes, I was. And I did notice that trucks were going around into the other lane as much as possible, as you do when you see a stalled car. Especially
when that stalled car is on fire. Yeah.
Yeah. I scooped up my son, who had no idea what was going on. I don't even think he was crying. He just was sitting there. And I scooped him up in my arms and I thought in my head, what am I going to do? I can't sit my baby in oncoming traffic. Where do I put him?
Right. But he's in his car seat, right?
He's in his car seat, but how can you just sit a car seat on the road? And of course, I thought to myself, I'm going to have to get my kids out and run. And I'm just going to run along the side of this trestle. Unbelievably, I'm going to run up the hill and just get as far as I can away from this car before it explodes. I didn't call 911, of course, because I'm just still acting. I'm still just getting my kids out, rescuing them out. So I took his car seat, and as I was thinking, I'm just going to lay him down right here behind the car. I went to go do that, and a arm came underneath the car seat, and I look up, and there's this big Samoan, sort of islander man. You picture kind of the guy in Moana.
Dwayne Johnson.
Kind of, yeah, just like a big guy, yeah. And he scoops him up and he says, "It's okay, mama." And he takes my baby and goes to his truck. And I just thought, hero. He's obviously, some sort of angel or something. So I never had to sit him down in the road because at that exact time, this man had scooped him up. And then I ran and got Talia, my daughter, out of the other seat. And as I opened up her door, the flames were covering the entire hood of the car at that time and were spreading quickly. I was so scared. And as I looked at her, she said my name like in a way that I just will never forget. I can almost still hear it, actually. She just said, "Mommy." But the way that she said it was like she was terrified. And so I got her out and just scooped her and ran for the truck that had Weston in it and opened the door. And here's this whole truck just full of men, islanders. They're all from Samoa, which I lived in New Zealand for 5 years. And so it was almost like comforting to me to be around these men, these islander men that I just feel like are family oriented people.
Especially when you know they are, at least the one man, they're good men.
Yes.
You know, because they stopped. They want to help.
They did. Yeah. And it was obvious they were on their way to like maybe a construction job or something, just the way they were dressed and things. And for them to stop on their way to work, you know, obviously, you know, they may have been late to work. You know, you have to kind of rush in the morning, and for them to stop. And as soon as I got in, I just, one of the guys had Weston's car seat sitting on him, and I just had my 3-year-old just in my arms, and I just said, "Go, go, go." And I was just holding her head. And he did. He just went into traffic and he just zoomed off. And as I looked back over my shoulder to see the car, the flames were all the way into the sky.
It was completely engulfed.
Yeah. It was like I just had a few minutes, you know, to have done that. It wasn't an explosion like a bang or anything, but it was enormous.
It was just burning up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's going through your head as you are driving away, or you're riding away in this truck with these men?
Honestly, at that time, it was just relief, which I think that there's probably no better feeling for a human than the feeling of absolute relief that something terrible was just about to happen and you have avoided that. Especially like it's like your worst fear as a mother, of course. You know, I could have just lost my children. We're going, and I just said, "Thank you, Jesus," so loudly. And, you know, all the men in the car were like tearing up. I mean, it was like everyone felt it. And then they said, "Where would you like us to drop you?" And I just said, "Just pull off in the first place." Just on the right-hand side was a car dealership, just at the end of the trestle. And so that's where they pulled in. They said that they weren't going to leave until I had a ride. And so I sat there in the car dealership and I actually called my one of my good friends. He was one of our pastors at the time, Luke. I called him, and I just said, I was obviously very emotional, and I just said, "Hey, my car, you know, it just erupted into flames. I don't know what happened. My car burned, and I'm here at this car dealership," you know, probably blubbering. It was probably hard to understand me. And he said, "I'm already buckling up. I'm in my car. Just tell me where to go." And he gave us a ride to my parents' house, which is close there. Then I just gave a huge hug to the guy who had rescued my son. And I just thanked him, and I never saw them again. I never called 911. I think it just slipped my mind. But in preparation for this podcast, I had contacted the 911 dispatch, and they were able to give me like a printout of everybody who called. I think it was four or five people had called 911 to report the fire. And even one woman had said, "There's a man taking her baby. The car's on fire. I don't know what's happening." So it must have been quite a sight as you're driving to work in the morning. But somebody who called 911, you know, obviously they dispatched the fire trucks. And when my friend Luke arrived to me, he said, "Hey," he's a funny guy. And he comes through the door and he goes, "Hey, sorry I'm late. There was a big fire on the road." And I just, you know, absolutely wept in his arms, you know, just the first person that I had seen after that had just happened. And I was still like in absolute shock. And then he took us to my parents' house. And that's where, when actually 911 called me, or somebody from 911 called me and asked me where they wanted the vehicle. And I said, "Are you Rachel Hawkins? We have your vehicle." And they delivered the charred car to my parents' house because they just have a lot of, more space to house vehicles. And when the car arrived on a tow truck, the tow truck driver was like, "I've never seen anything quite like this." And they were removing the car, and I just walked around the vehicle, got my purse. My purse was in the back seat, and actually it had ashes on it.
Were the contents of your purse okay?
Actually, yes, they were. They were in the back seat where the children would have been. It had ashes on it, but yeah, the contents were still there. And the front seat where I had just been sitting, like an hour before, was metal. It was like black metal, completely charred. The steering wheel, there was like nothing left of it. It was just, that part I think was maybe one of the most traumatic parts for me for some reason. Just, I think, seeing what could have happened, what could have been.
Yeah, because you were right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
If the flames started up in the engine area and moved back, maybe the fire department was able to put it out before it got, to the rest of the car. Or
to the gas tank, I guess, is where it could explode. Yeah, I think that's right.
You're looking at that burned up car. You must have had all kinds of thoughts going through your head.
Yeah. Yeah, I obviously thought, I have just lived my worst nightmare. And then I thought, I don't know if I ever want to drive again. And then I also thought, I would do this again in a heartbeat. I would do this every time for my children.
Because you're a mother, of course.
Yeah. Yes.
Did you find it difficult to go to sleep that night?
Yeah. I don't specifically remember that night exactly, but I remember a few nights waking up. It was like I couldn't get away from it. And I'm sure a lot of people who have been through trauma, understand the feeling of just it's like, why am I reliving it? I'm just reliving it every night. Of course, in the dream, it's worse even than real life because it's like, I guess your mind is playing tricks on you, like what could have happened, maybe.
And you have since driven across the trestle again.
Yeah.
Obviously, did you see black marks in the road or anything from where your car was?
Yes, exactly where my car was. It's almost like every time I drive the trestle, I have to look. But yeah, even the last time I have driven across it, I saw this big black mark on the wall where the car was in flames. It actually was hard to drive for a long time. And for me, I think that's kind of a touchy subject because my mom is a very nervous driver and growing up, she only drove in our little town. And I always told myself, I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to drive everywhere. And I typically do, but I was petrified every time I got in the car. In fact, I have one memory of driving along. There must have been a fire, a bonfire going on or something at the time, around the neighborhood. And I'm driving into work. And as I'm driving, I'm physically shaking and rolled down my window, to smell, I was just smelling obsessively, to see if it was my car. And I pulled off and I turned off my car to see if there was smoke, and I turned it back on. I got to get to work, and actually drove, to my parking spot at work. And I just sat there and cried. What is this, how it's going to be that I'm not going to be able to ever drive? And my husband does say that I have a nose for smoke. I've had it where I've been something's burning, and I'm always right.
The sense of smell is very closely associated with memory. And so you smell something that is familiar, it takes you right back to that day, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It does.
Wow. And yeah, Ruben said that he noticed some things in you that were sort of symptoms of that you had been through that trauma.
Trauma is something that I'm not really familiar with, honestly. It's probably something that I try to avoid talking overtly about your feelings or difficulties in a way that's really debilitating. I'm from England, and I think that's probably a little less part of our culture. It certainly was for my family. Very much, we don't share the deeper levels of how we're feeling with one another. And it's something that's been an issue in my marriage and just in life. I wish I was more open to that. So those conversations and those feelings that she was having, I didn't feel like I really knew how to respond to that to best help her. But what I did kind of get the sense of was that it was really something that was going to be very difficult for her to move on from. So the fact that she actually mentioned that she was interested in seeing a counselor, that was the first time that I think it fired home to me, just the severity of what she went through from an emotional point of view. When she said that she had a close friend who was a counselor and she wanted to go over to their house and be able to talk about it, I was all on board. And I was interested to see what that would look like and what difference that would cause, if any. And I think really it wasn't really for the weeks and months after the event occurred that I realized quite how much it was preying on Rachel's mind. She would talk about when she would close her eyes, how she would see it, or when she would drive past that spot, it was instant flashbacks. And I understand all that. And I think that counseling did really help her.
I'm normally a very joyful, happy person. And I think I was struggling, afterwards and just feeling like nobody understood.
Yeah. Who else has been through something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you find someone to talk to that can really identify with it?
Yeah.
Did you have therapy?
Yeah. So I'm not typically a therapy goer. I believe in therapy, but I haven't always been very consistent with that in my life. But I have a friend who is a trauma counselor, and she was like, I'm here if you need it. And I was kind of getting desperate, and I was like, yeah, I'd like to just meet with you even once just to see if it helps. She told me about something called EMDR therapy, which is, I believe, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And this is a therapy that I guess is often used in trauma therapy, specifically like for soldiers who have come back from war, where it can be done with either like a light that scans left to right and your eyes are following the light as you talk, or it can be done with what I did was she gave me 2 little balls to squeeze, one hand at a time as I was telling my story. Or you can, I think, do tapping from the left to the right as you speak. So what I think it's supposed to do is it's like a bilateral stimulation that takes your physical side with your emotional side and kind of separates that so that you can speak about it or you can remember the event without feeling physical side effects, which is really interesting. But my friend said to me, the therapist said to me, are you interested in this therapy? And I was like, I'll try it. To be honest, I don't really believe in it. I don't know if it's going to help. I just feel like squeezing a ball isn't really going to help me.
Right. What good's that going to do, right?
Yeah. But it was about maybe an hour session, our first time meeting. And she just first of all, she just had me tell the story as I was squeezing the balls. And at the time, I could not talk about it without just crying. I was just weeping as I was talking, and I was still squeezing the balls. And then after that, she would just ask me questions and, continuously squeezing as I was answering. And then she had me go through this like hypothetical, like what would have happened if you didn't make it back to the car to get Talia. Go through all the way through the funeral, standing at the graveside, just really deep, heart-wrenching things too.
That sounds like extra trauma that you don't need to think about.
I know, but I'm not a therapist, but apparently going through that and realizing that didn't end up happening and that everything is okay, somehow it really helps. And afterwards, she asked me, well, how do you feel? And I was like, I actually feel better. So I super recommend it. And I don't even think I had a bad dream afterwards.
So just one session.
One session, I didn't have any nightmares afterwards, but I, of course, still had a hard time remembering it. But, I could tell the story without crying. And it's just, of course, time has helped as well. But I hugely recommend trauma therapy. Yes.
Trauma therapy. And in your case, specifically EMDR trauma therapy.
Yes.
And of course, I have to put the disclaimer in here that you nor I are medical professionals, and anyone who has been through trauma needs to consult their own physician and therapist and see what's right for them. Because
sure.
I've had many of my guests who have been through something traumatic have talked about EMDR therapy and how amazing it is, but it's not for everyone. So you just have to kind of figure that out directly. Yeah. How long ago did this happen?
This was the end of 2018. So my kids are a little older now. I have a third child now, actually.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Is there any part of the story that we haven't talked about that you want to mention?
I think I worried that my children would be traumatized from it, and they don't even remember it. So neither of them remember it. So that's
amazing. Talia was 3.
Yeah.
I would think something like that happening, she would.
Yeah, you would think it'd be a core memory, but no, she doesn't.
Better that they don't.
Yes.
And a big thanks to the truck full of men who were in the right place at the right time.
That's right. I think that, I wouldn't always pull over when I see a stalled car, especially a burning vehicle. I think I probably would think, oh, let's sway away from that, because I am not a mechanical person. I don't know how I would help, but after this happened to me, I think it's changed my perspective. Like, there's always something that you can do, or even just offer, because it's people like that, stopping their day to help a stranger. I think it helps us all to know that there's good in the world, and that there are good people, but also that, I think it changes the next time that we see that it might give us a second thought to stop and help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet if you saw a car on fire, you would probably stop now.
Yeah, yeah.
Doing that, though, you think that might re-traumatize you?
Maybe. Yeah, it could.
But it's kind of maybe coming full circle, though. You were helped in that situation, and now you can be the helper.
Right, a little redemptive, I would think. Yeah, be able to help someone else.
Good job, Mom.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, whenever my kids are like, Mommy, you never such and such, I'm like, I love you. Let me tell you, I walked into a burning car for you, and I would do it again.
You can see pictures of Rachel and her kids, as well as the burned up car, in the episode notes at whatwasthatlike.com/216. I also had one more question for Rachel. Did you ever figure out what happened, why the car caught on fire?
Well, no, I don't. I don't know exactly what happened, but I did some research, and this specific make and model of that year that car was, that it has happened before, that it has spontaneously combusted for multiple people.
That would have been nice to know ahead of time.
Yeah. But, it's like, what are the odds? But it's definitely made me not want to buy that car again. That's for sure.
And we can't say the make and model of Rachel's car here on the podcast, but Rachel is in the What Was That Like private Facebook group, and she can answer that question there. whatwasthatlike.com/Facebook. And in that group, the question we asked this week was, what's your irrational fear? And I thought about the phrasing of that question, actually, because if you're genuinely afraid of something, is it really irrational? But anyway, that's the question, and people are interpreting it and answering it in their own way. That's what we do in that group, and I love it because we have some great discussions over there. And you're welcome to join us. And if you join before midnight tonight, you can get in at a 50% discount. Just go to whatwasthatlike.com/Facebook. Just kidding about the discount. It's always free to join. Graphics for this episode were created by Bob Bretz. Full episode transcription was created by James Lai. And like we end every episode, we're about to hear this week's listener story. If you have an interesting story that you can tell in about 5 to 10 minutes, record it on your phone and email it to me, scott@whatwasthatlike.com. This listener story is in keeping with today's theme of a mother saving her child. And in this case, we get to hear from the child as well. The mother here is Kiona. She's a professional birth worker, and she has a storytelling podcast called Birth as We Know It. Every episode is someone telling their story about giving birth, from conception to postpartum. And if you're in the Seattle area and you need the best doula in town, that's Kiona. Birth work is her passion, and she's attended more than 140 births. You can get in touch with her through her website at birthasweknowitpodcast.com. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, Scott. This is the story where I, Kiona, had to give my son, Cairo, the Heimlich maneuver when he was... Yes, when he was just 3.5 years old.
I thought I was 4.
You were almost 4.
I thought I was like 4.5.
You were 3.5 because I was pregnant with your sister Katana at the time. So, Cairo, I'm going to start by telling the story, and then I want you to tell me what it made you feel like when it was happening, okay? So, for me, as your mom, I saw you playing on the bunk bed, and you had a magnet. And I remember taking the magnets earlier in the day, but you and Kavina snuck one magnet because you just wanted to keep playing with it. And I didn't know that you still had it. So I was just cleaning your room, and then I saw you playing around up on the top bunk. And then I was getting ready to leave the room, and then I look at you, and you're like trying to cough, you're pounding on your chest and stuff. And I'm like, what's wrong? What's wrong? I just heard, right? That's all I heard. And so when I look at you, I freak out because you're on the top bunk. And as a mom, kids always put stuff in their mouths, right? So usually a couple pats on the back is enough. But that moment, I did the few pats on the back and it wasn't working. And then I did it again and it wasn't working. And I did it again and it wasn't working. And I started getting scared. And I knew that I had to act quickly because you were starting to turn purple and your neck was starting to like get really veiny, which was showing me that you weren't breathing. And so what I did was at that point, while I was 7 months pregnant with your sister, I just picked you up off the ground and I started trying to give you the Heimlich maneuver. And in my mom brain, I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to throw up all over the floor if I do this, and we're on carpet. So what I do is I run into our bedroom instead of your bedroom and go into our master bathroom. And
I remember that.
You remember that? And then I'm like running past your grandma, running past your older sister, and running past your dad.
Yeah, I remember you were just screaming, Cairo's choking.
Yes, I was screaming, Cairo's choking, Cairo's choking. And I tried to do the Heimlich again. I did it twice and it didn't work. And I was really scared. And then when we were finally in the bathroom, we were above the bathtub and I changed the way I did it. I did the Heimlich and then I also turned you upside down and patted your back hard that way. Do you remember that? And I did that a few times. And then that is when the magnet finally came out. I didn't know it was a magnet until it came out of your mouth. And I'm going to cuss really quick because I remember saying, it was a fucking magnet. Do you remember hearing me say that? Yeah. And you were like, whoa, mom cussed, right? I remember right when it was about to come out of your mouth, your dad started calling 911. But by the time they said, do you need us to send someone? It just came out of your mouth. And he was like, no, the magnet just came out. It's fine. And guess how long all of that took? 3 minutes.
For me, it felt like 50 million years.
Me too. It felt like a really long time for me too. So tell me how it felt for you. At what point did you realize that you were actually choking?
When the magnet like fell in my mouth, and then I was just trying to like take it out with my tongue, and I was like, where is it? And then I started like to cough, and I was like, oh no, I'm choking.
How did it fall in your mouth?
I was just like going like this on while I was laying down. Then I like slipped out of my hands.
You were playing with it in the air above your face when you were laying down?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And then it just slipped out of my hands and then it fell down my throat.
Mm-hmm. What did it feel like to you when you were choking?
It just felt really scary, and it felt like I just felt like I was gonna die. It just felt super weird.
You felt like you were going to die?
Yes.
Tell me more about what that means.
I could feel like my face turning like a different color, and now I was just like super scared, and like I didn't know what to do because I couldn't breathe, so then I couldn't really move my arms because all my veins were focused on my neck.
You felt like you were just getting a lot of pressure in your neck or something?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what it felt like when Mommy was giving you the Heimlich? Like when I was squeezing you really
It just
tight?
felt like pulsing on my belly, and then I could kind of feel it coming up. So then I like when I knew you like did the other technique, I knew it would come out.
You did. So was there any point when you were worried about whether or not it was going to work?
It was at the first one.
You knew that it was going to?
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel once the magnet came out?
I was just in relief, and I was gonna, I don't know if I did, but like I felt like I was gonna cry.
Yeah. I felt like I was going to cry. You started crying when it came out a little bit, and then I was in so much shock that I couldn't cry. And then I was like hesitant to put you down to sleep that night because I was like, oh my gosh, is he going to be okay? Like, did you have enough oxygen going to your brain? Like during that time that we were doing the Heimlich, because you couldn't breathe and it was obvious you couldn't breathe. And so I remember getting a text from Papa, my dad, and he said, hey, what happened? And I told him what happened, and I just started crying. I was crying and crying and crying. I felt like such a horrible mom, but truly, I just did my best.
You actually saved my life.
I did. Yeah, I did. And I'm happy I did because I love you and you're so smart and kind and brave and you're really good at video games.
Why don't you let me play them that often?
Because you have to have a limitation, of course. But I love you. Thanks for sharing your story with me.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Boy.
One thing that I wish I knew before doing the Heimlich on Cairo was that when you're doing the Heimlich on a small child, you should actually kneel behind them while their feet are still on the ground, because it makes the force of the Heimlich more useful rather than picking them up and trying to provide that force when they're kind of ragdolls in your arms. So if any of you listeners need to do the Heimlich on a small child, I would just keep that in mind. All right, thanks for listening.